The temporal empire sprawled across the stars like a glittering web of chronological perfection. At its center sat the Time Palace, a structure that seemed to exist simultaneously in multiple eras, its spires reaching into futures not yet realized, its foundations buried in pasts long forgotten. Here, Empress Aryara ruled with the unflinching precision of the universal timepiece itself. Aryara was not merely an empress, she was a time sorceress of unparalleled power. Immortal through her mastery of temporal manipulation, she had guided the empire through millennia of prosperity. Her face, timeless and beautiful, betrayed no emotion as she observed the workings of her realm from her crystalline throne, which pulsed with the heartbeat of time itself. The corridors of the Time Palace required constant maintenance. Quantum dust accumulated in corners where reality folded upon itself, and temporal residue stained the marble floors where the Empress had bent moments to her will. This was the domain of Tan, the palace janitor. Tan moved through the palace with quiet dignity. His weathered hands gripped his mop with the expertise of someone who had spent decades perfecting a craft others considered menial. His eyes, deep and melancholic, held secrets he never spoke aloud, memories of a tragic past he had spent lifetimes trying to forget. Yet, there was a gentle nobility in his movements, a grace that seemed at odds with his humble station. Each day, he cleaned the same corridors, polished the same time-warped mirrors, and emptied the same containers of possibility fragments. And each day, he caught glimpses of the Empress, radiant, powerful, and utterly alone. Though he never spoke to her directly, something in his heart recognized something in hers. It was a silent, unrequited love, born from countless moments observing her solitude that mirrored his own. At the heart of the Time Palace lay the most precious and dangerous artifact in the Empire, the stasis crystal. Ancient beyond measure, it glowed with an inner light that seemed to pulse with the very rhythm of creation. The crystal possessed a unique property. Anyone who touched it could freeze time around them, suspending all motion and change in the universe while remaining unaffected themselves. This power was reserved exclusively for the Empress and her most trusted Time Lords. The crystal's chamber was guarded day and night, accessible only through a series of temporal locks that responded to specific chronological signatures. Tan was permitted entry only to clean, always under supervision, always when the Empress was elsewhere. Until the day everything changed. Aryara had been watching Tan for longer than he realized. Through her temporal scrying pools, she had observed his careful work, his silent reverence for the palace, and the way his eyes followed her with pure adoration untainted by ambition or fear. In her millennia of rule, she had never encountered such uncomplicated devotion. Curiosity, an emotion long dormant in her ancient heart, began to stir. What was it about this simple janitor that drew her attention? Why, among all her subjects, did his gaze make her feel seen rather than merely observed? One evening, as the temporal tides receded and the palace grew quiet, Aryara made an unprecedented decision. She entered the crystal chamber alone, dismissed the guards, and waited. When Tan arrived with his cleaning supplies, he froze in the doorway, eyes wide with surprise and apprehension. "Enter," she commanded, her voice like the chime of perfect chronology. Tan obeyed, keeping his eyes respectfully lowered. "Your Majesty, I can return later if—" "I wish you to stay," she interrupted. "I have been watching you, Tan." His heart thundered in his chest, but he remained silent, awaiting her next words. "There is something about you," she continued, circling him slowly. "Something different. I wonder." Without warning, she reached for the stasis crystal. Its light intensified, becoming almost blinding. With a gesture both elegant and precise, she activated its power. The universe stopped. Throughout the palace, the empire, and beyond to the furthest reaches of reality, everything froze in perfect stillness. Time lords in mid-discussion. Celestial bodies in their orbits. Light itself paused in its endless journey, all suspended in a single, perfect moment. All except Tan. He blinked, confused, as he realized he could still move. He watched in astonishment as a drop of water from his mop hung suspended in the air, caught in an impossible pause between falling and landing. "Fascinating," said the Empress, her voice cutting through the absolute silence of a frozen universe. "Just as I suspected." "Your Majesty," Tan's voice trembled. "What's happening? Why can I still move?" "That," she replied, her eyes gleaming with curiosity, "is precisely what I intend to discover." The Time Palace had transformed into a tableau of perfect stillness. Servants stood frozen mid-step. Birds hung motionless in the air outside crystal windows. And even the famous quantum fountains in the central courtyard had become sculptures of suspended water, light refracting through droplets that would never fall. Tan followed the Empress through this frozen world, his mind struggling to comprehend what had happened. She moved with purpose, occasionally touching a frozen person or object with an almost childlike fascination. "I have never done this before," she admitted, surprising Tan with her candor. "Frozen everything. I've always feared what might happen. But you?" She turned to face him. "You intrigue me. Why are you immune to the crystal's power? What makes you different?" "I don't know, Your Majesty," Tan replied honestly. "I'm just a janitor." "No one is just anything," she countered. "There are no accidents in time." She led him to her private observatory, a vast dome where the stars were not merely viewed, but experienced. Here, time and space intermingled, allowing the observer to witness cosmic events from any perspective. Now, the stars hung unmoving, their light suspended in eternal patterns. "We must find answers," she declared. "And to do so, we must delve into your past." Tan's heart constricted with fear. His past was a wound he had spent lifetimes trying to heal. "Your Majesty, Do not fear," she said, and for the first time, her voice carried an undertone of gentleness. "I will guide you, but I must know what makes you immune to time's suspension." Together, they began a journey through the palace archives, searching for clues. The Empress accessed records normally forbidden to all but her, seeking any mention of immunity to temporal manipulation. Tan assisted as best he could, though much of the ancient writing was beyond his understanding. Days passed, or would have, if time were still flowing. In the frozen universe, they existed in a perpetual now, measuring their progress only by the tasks they completed. As they worked side by side, something unexpected began to happen. The Empress, accustomed to the reverent fear of her subjects, found herself appreciating Tan's straightforward manner. He, in turn, discovered that beneath her regal exterior beat a heart filled with loneliness and the burden of eternal rule. They talked as they had never talked with anyone before. In the silence of a paused universe, their words seemed to carry greater weight, their truths more profound. "I was not always Empress," Aryara confessed one day, as they rested in the frozen garden. "Once, I was merely a gifted child, discovered by the previous emperor for my temporal abilities." "What was that like?" Tan asked, forgetting formality in his genuine interest. "Terrifying, exhilarating." She touched a motionless butterfly, its wings a perfect study in suspended beauty. "I was taken from my family, trained in art so ancient their origins were already forgotten. I learned to bend moments, to stretch seconds into hours, to compress years into heartbeats." Tan listened, entranced by this glimpse of the woman behind the crown. "And you?" she asked. "What made you a janitor in the Time Palace?" Tan hesitated, then slowly began to speak of his past. He told her of his childhood on a distant agricultural world, of the family he had lost to a temporal anomaly, a rift that had swallowed his village whole, leaving him the sole survivor. How he had wandered, worked menial jobs across the empire, eventually finding his way to the capital and the palace. "I sought understanding," he explained. "I thought being close to the source of temporal power might help me comprehend what happened to my family." "And did it?" she asked softly. "No," he admitted. "But I found purpose in my work here. There is honesty in cleaning, in making things right again." As he spoke, The Empress felt a stirring of recognition. Something about his story resonated with her in ways she couldn't articulate. Their research continued, yielding little progress until they discovered an ancient text in a forgotten chamber. The manuscript spoke of souls that time cannot touch and spirits bonded across the great wheel of existence. This describes individuals who have formed connections that transcend temporal laws. The Empress translated, her fingers tracing the faded script. Souls that have encountered each other throughout multiple incarnations, forming bonds that even the manipulation of time cannot sever. What does that mean? Tan asked, though something deep within him trembled with recognition. It means, she said slowly, her eyes meeting his, that we have met before, in other lives, other times. Our souls recognize each other, even if our conscious minds do not. The revelation hung between them, profound and unsettling. The Empress closed the book, her expression thoughtful. There is a way to know for certain, she said, but it requires accessing memories from past incarnations, a dangerous process. I'm willing, Tan said without hesitation. The Empress led him to a chamber he had cleaned 1,000 times but never truly seen. Behind a temporal veil lay the reflection pool, a mirror-smooth surface that reflected not the present, but the myriad possibilities of past and future. This will show us the truth, she explained, activating the pool with a gesture. But be warned, what we see may change everything. Together, they gazed into the depths. The surface rippled, then cleared to reveal visions of lives long past. They saw themselves in countless incarnations throughout history. Aryara as a village healer in a primitive society, Tan as a warrior who protected her from raiders, Aryara as a scholar in a great library, Tan as the architect who built it, Aryara as a lost child, Tan as the stranger who guided her home. But most significantly, they witnessed a scene from the ancient past, before the Empire, before time manipulation became possible. Aryara, not yet immortal, lay dying after a battle. Tan, then a healer, used forgotten magic to save her, binding his soul to hers in the process. You gave part of your essence to save my life, the Empress whispered, watching the scene unfold. That connection has echoed through all our subsequent incarnations. That's why I'm immune to the crystal's power. Tan realized, part of my soul already exists within you, outside the normal flow of time. The pool's surface stilled, returning to its mirror-like state. They stood in silence, the weight of countless shared lifetimes settling between them. All this time, Aryara said softly, I thought I ruled alone. You never have, Tan replied, finding courage he didn't know he possessed. Some part of me has always been with you. Their newfound understanding changed everything. The formal distance between them dissolved, replaced by a companionship neither had experienced before. They continued to explore the frozen universe together, now with a shared purpose, understanding the limits and possibilities of their unique connection. But as they grew closer, danger was stirring within the suspended empire. Not everyone had been frozen by the stasis crystal's power. General Karan, commander of the Imperial Temporal Guard, had long harbored ambitions beyond his station. For centuries, he had served the Empress with outward loyalty while secretly studying forbidden temporal arts. He had created for himself a partial immunity to temporal manipulation, not complete like Tan's, but enough to move slowly, painfully, through the frozen time. Karan had assembled a cadre of like-minded Time Lords, all hungry for the power the Empress wielded alone. They called themselves the Flux Rebellion, and they had been planning their coup for decades. When the universe froze, Karan recognized his opportunity. Moving with agonizing slowness through the suspended reality, he gathered his co-conspirators, using forbidden devices to awaken them from temporal stasis. Their plan was simple but devastating. Steal the stasis crystal while the Empress was distracted, use it to maintain the universal freeze, and rewrite the laws of time with themselves as the new rulers. What they didn't account for was Tan's complete immunity and his devotion to the Empress. As Aryara and Tan continued their exploration of their shared past, they remained unaware of the threat slowly mobilizing against them. It was only when they returned to the crystal chamber and found signs of intrusion that they realized they were not alone in the frozen universe. Someone has attempted to access the crystal's secondary controls, the Empress observed, examining the subtle disturbances in the chamber's protective wards. Someone with temporal resistance. Is that possible? Tan asked, alarmed. Not naturally, she replied, her expression hardening. Only through forbidden practices, temporal grafting, chronological vampirism, the consumption of distilled moments, all punishable by eternal stasis. Who would risk such a thing? The Empress's eyes narrowed. Someone who believes the reward outweighs the risk. Someone who has coveted my power for a very long time. She turned to Tan. Her decision made. We must set a trap. Together, they prepared. The Empress, drawing on her vast knowledge of temporal manipulation, created subtle alterations in the palace's chronological architecture, tripwires that would alert them to any movement. Tan, with his intimate knowledge of the palace's physical layout, identified potential hiding places and escape routes. Their trap was baited with a rumor, whispered into the ear of a frozen courtier whom Aryara temporarily awakened. A courtier she had long suspected of divided loyalties. The rumor suggested that the Empress would be performing a ritual to strengthen the stasis crystal's effects, leaving it momentarily vulnerable during a specific alignment of the imperial moons. Then they waited, hidden in a temporal fold that rendered them invisible to all but the most perceptive observers. Their patience was rewarded when General Karan and 3 Time Lords entered the crystal chamber during the predicted alignment. They moved with the stiffness of those fighting against temporal resistance, but they moved nonetheless, confirmation of their guilt. Treason, the Empress whispered, her voice cold with fury. From those I trusted most. What will you do? Tan asked. Justice must be served, she replied. But first, we must understand the extent of their conspiracy. They followed the conspirators secretly, watching as Karan led his fellows to a hidden chamber beneath the palace, a place even Tan had never cleaned, its existence erased from the official records. Here, the true scope of the Flux Rebellion became clear. Dozens of Time Lords had been awakened from stasis, all gathered around a makeshift version of the reflection pool. Karan stood before them, his aristocratic features animated with fervor as he outlined his vision. The Empress has ruled for too long, he declared. Time itself has stagnated under her conservative guidance. She fears change, fears progress. With the stasis crystal in our possession, we will rewrite the temporal laws. We will accelerate evolution, advance our species, become gods among the lesser races. His audience responded with murmurs of approval and anticipation. The day of great freezing has given us our opportunity. Karan continued. While she is distracted with her pet janitor, we will seize control. Our agents are already positioned throughout the palace. When the 3rd moon reaches its apex, we strike. Aryara and Tan exchanged alarmed glances. The 3rd moon would reach its apex soon, if time were flowing normally. In the frozen universe, the celestial bodies hung motionless. But the conspirators had clearly found a way to track the passage of true time beneath the stasis effect. We must return to the crystal chamber, the Empress whispered. Now. They hurried back through the frozen palace, taking shortcuts through servants' passages that Tan knew intimately. As they approached the chamber, they found their way blocked by 2 of Karan's loyal guards, partially awakened from stasis. For the first time, Tan witnessed the Empress's combat prowess. With graceful gestures, she manipulated the small pockets of time around the guards, aging one guard's armor until it crumbled to dust and reversing the other's personal timeline until he regressed to a state of infantile confusion. I take no pleasure in this, she told Tan as they stepped over the incapacitated guards. To use time against another being is a grave responsibility. When they reached the crystal chamber, they found it already occupied. 3 Time Lords were performing a complex ritual around the stasis crystal, their movements synchronized despite the resistance of frozen time. They're attempting to transfer control of the crystal, Aryara explained, her voice tight with concern. If they succeed, they could destroy the very fabric of reality. What can we do? Tan asked. We must break their connection to the crystal. She turned to him, her expression grave. Tan, your immunity makes you our greatest weapon. While I distract them, you must disrupt their ritual circle. Without waiting for his response, the Empress stepped into the chamber. Her appearance shocked the conspirators, momentarily breaking their concentration. Treason, she pronounced, her voice echoing with the weight of imperial judgment. You risk not just your lives but the stability of time itself. The risk is necessary, Empress, replied the lead Time Lord, recovering quickly. Your era is ending. Time demands new masters. As they argued, Tan crept around the periphery of the chamber, using skills honed through decades of invisible service. The Time Lords, focused on the Empress, failed to notice his approach until he physically broke their ritual circle, pushing one lord into another and scattering their temporal focusing devices. Chaos erupted. The disrupted ritual sent feedback through the stasis crystal, causing localized temporal distortions throughout the chamber. Objects aged and regressed randomly. Sections of the floor and walls cycled through past and future states. In the confusion, Aryara seized the opportunity to reclaim direct control of the crystal. With a series of precise gestures, she stabilized the escalating temporal fluctuations, then turned her attention to the conspirators. You will be judged according to imperial law, she declared, using her power to bind them in personal time loops, each trapped in a 3-second cycle of their own existence. With the immediate threat contained, the Empress turned to Tan. This was merely the first wave, she said grimly. Karen's main force will come soon. We must prepare. Together, they fortified the crystal chamber, using both the Empress's temporal arts and Tan's practical knowledge. They created overlapping fields of accelerated and decelerated time around the entrances, set temporal traps that would age intruders to dust or regress them to infancy, and established a final defensive line around the crystal itself. As they worked, the Empress shared more of her knowledge with Tan, teaching him to recognize the signs of temporal manipulation even if he couldn't perform it himself. His immunity made him the perfect observer, able to see patterns that even she sometimes missed. If I had found you centuries ago, she told him during a brief rest, much might have been different. We found each other when we were meant to, he replied simply. Their preparations were completed just as they detected movement approaching the chamber, Karan and his main force, advancing through the frozen palace with grim determination. Remember, the Empress said, taking her position. They cannot truly harm time itself, only its flow. The universe will endure, whatever happens here. Tan nodded, taking his place beside her. I am ready, Your Majesty. Aryara, she corrected gently. In this moment, between the two of us, I am simply Aryara. The battle that followed would later be recorded in imperial histories as the Chrono Conflict, though such histories were yet to be written, suspended in the frozen universe alongside everything else. General Karan led his forces with tactical brilliance, using their limited temporal resistance to navigate through the Empress's defenses. Some were caught in her traps, aging to dust in seconds or regressing to childhood, but enough made it through to present a serious threat. Tan proved invaluable. His complete immunity to temporal effects allowed him to move freely through the battlefield of warped time, disrupting the rebels' formations and sabotaging their temporal focusing devices. Without these devices, their already limited movement became even more strained. The Empress herself was magnificent. She wielded time like an artist, creating pockets where hours passed in seconds for the rebels while she operated in normal time, giving her an overwhelming advantage. She avoided lethal force where possible, preferring to trap her opponents in temporal bubbles for later judgment. Karan, however, had prepared for this conflict his entire life. He wore a chronological dampening field that partially protected him from the Empress's manipulations. and he carried weapons designed specifically to disrupt her control of time. As the battle raged around them, Karan fought his way closer to the stasis crystal. His plan became clear. He intended not to claim the crystal, but to destabilize it, creating a chain reaction that would destroy the current temporal reality and allow him to reshape what emerged from the chaos. He's insane, Aryara gasped as she parried one of his temporal lances with a shield of compressed moments. He'll unravel everything, past, present, future, nothing will remain. Tan, fighting nearby, heard her words and understood the stakes with sudden clarity. The universe itself hung in the balance, not just the Empire or their lives. Karan pressed his advantage, driving the Empress back toward the crystal. "You've grown complacent," he taunted. "Too long on the throne, too certain of your right to control time. The universe demands evolution, demands change." "Change, yes," she countered, deflecting another attack. "Destruction, no. You would unmake reality to satisfy your ambition." As they fought, Tan noticed something alarming. The stasis crystal's glow had intensified, pulsing with an irregular rhythm that suggested instability. Each time Karan's weapons discharged near it, the pulses grew more erratic. Acting on instinct, Tan positioned himself between the crystal and the combatants. He could feel its energy washing over him, through him, recognizing the fragment of his soul that resided in the Empress. There was a connection there, something he could use. The fight reached its climax as Karan unleashed his most devastating weapon, a chronological inverter designed to reverse the Empress's connection to the crystal. For a crucial moment, her control faltered, and Karan lunged toward the artifact, triumph in his eyes. It was in this moment that Tan made his decision. Drawing on the connection he shared with Aryara across countless lifetimes, he placed his hands on the stasis crystal and surrendered himself to its power. A blinding light erupted from the crystal, enveloping Tan completely. The Empress felt it immediately, a resonance with the part of his soul that had always been linked to hers. Through this connection, power flowed, amplified, and redirected. Time itself seemed to hold its breath. Then, with a sound like the universe sighing, the light receded. Tan stood transformed, his ordinary appearance unchanged, but an unmistakable aura of temporal energy surrounding him. The crystal pulsed in harmony with his heartbeat. "Impossible," Karan whispered, his weapon forgotten in his shock. "Not impossible," Tan replied, his voice resonating with newfound power. "Inevitable. Time remembers its debts. General." With a gesture, Tan created a temporal binding that encased Karan completely, suspending him in a perfect moment of defeat. The remaining rebels, seeing their leader captured and the Janitor transformed, threw down their weapons and surrendered. The crisis was averted, but at a cost. As the glow around Tan began to fade, he stumbled, catching himself against the crystal's pedestal. "Tan!" Aryara rushed to his side, supporting him. "What have you done?" "What was necessary," he said weakly. "I used our connection to stabilize the crystal, but in doing so..." He didn't need to finish. They both felt it. His immunity to temporal effects was gone, sacrificed to save the universe. "You fool," she whispered, but there was no anger in her voice, only a profound mixture of gratitude and sorrow. "You beautiful fool." With the rebellion quelled and Karan contained, the Empress faced her most challenging decision: what to do about the frozen universe. The stasis crystal had been active for what would have been weeks in normal time. Its power had reached further than ever before, touching the furthest corners of reality. The longer everything remains frozen, the more difficult it will be to restart time safely. She explained to Tan as they stood in the observatory, looking out at the motionless stars. There will be consequences: temporal aftershocks, chronological storms, pockets of accelerated or decelerated time that may last for centuries. "But it can be done?" Tan asked. His body had mostly recovered from the strain of connecting with the crystal, but they both knew he had been fundamentally changed by the experience. "Yes," she confirmed, but not without sacrifice. The process would require both of them. The Empress would use her mastery of temporal arts to gradually release the universe from stasis, sector by sector, world by world. Tan, because of his unique connection to both the Empress and the crystal, would serve as an anchor, a fixed point around which time could safely resume its flow. They prepared carefully, studying ancient texts and making complex calculations. The release of temporal stasis needed to be precisely controlled to prevent catastrophic disruptions in the fabric of reality. As they worked, their relationship deepened further. The formal barriers between Empress and Janitor had long since dissolved, replaced by a partnership unlike any in the history of the Empire. They were bound by shared purpose, shared danger, and a connection that transcended ordinary understanding. Finally, after what would have been months in normal time, they were ready. The ceremony would take place in the heart of the Time Palace, where the temporal currents converged most powerfully. "Once we begin, there is no turning back," Aryara warned as they made their final preparations. "Are you certain you wish to proceed? Your role carries significant risk." "I have never been more certain of anything," Tan replied simply. The ritual began at what would have been dawn, had time been flowing. The Empress stood before the stasis crystal, her hands moving in complex patterns as she recited incantations in the ancient language of time. Tan knelt opposite her, his hands resting on specially prepared focusing points on the floor. As the Empress's power engaged with the crystal, Tan felt the connection between them strengthen. Through this bond, he could sense the immense forces she was controlling, the entirety of frozen time, held in perfect balance, waiting to be released. Gradually, methodically, Aryara began to relinquish her hold on stasis. She started with the outer reaches of the Empire, carefully monitoring the resumption of temporal flow through her connection with Tan. The process was excruciating for both of them. The Empress bore the immense mental strain of orchestrating time's restart with perfect precision. Tan endured the physical toll of serving as the anchor, his body vibrating with temporal energies that threatened to tear him apart at the molecular level. Hours passed as they worked inward from the edges of the Empire toward the capital. Sweat beaded on the Empress's brow, blood trickled from Tan's nose and ears. Neither spoke of stopping. As the resumption of time reached the capital planet, they encountered the first serious complications. The high concentration of temporal manipulation devices and artifacts created interference patterns, causing dangerous fluctuations in the time stream. "Hold steady," Aryara commanded through gritted teeth as she fought to stabilize the fluctuations. "We're nearly there." Tan nodded, unable to speak as he channeled more energy through their connection. His vision blurred, his consciousness flickering as the strain threatened to overwhelm him. In this most challenging moment, something remarkable happened. Their souls, already linked through countless lifetimes, began to synchronize on a deeper level than ever before. Memories flowed between them, not just of their current lives, but of all the incarnations they had shared throughout history. Through this perfect union of souls, they found new strength. Together, they stabilized the time stream, guiding it safely back into its natural flow throughout the capital. Finally, only the Time Palace itself remained frozen. This would be the most delicate part of all, restoring time to the very nexus of temporal power in the Empire. "Are you ready?" the Empress asked, her voice hoarse with exhaustion. "Together," Tan replied, finding the strength to smile. With a final, perfectly coordinated effort, they released the palace from stasis. Time rushed back like a tide, filling every corner, bringing motion and life to the suspended tableau. The guards blinked in confusion. The servants continued conversations interrupted weeks ago, and the quantum fountains resumed their eternal dance of possibilities. To all but Aryara and Tan, it seemed that no time had passed at all. The effort left them both collapsed on the floor of the crystal chamber, drained beyond exhaustion. Palace guards rushed in, alarmed to find their Empress seemingly injured, but she waved them away with a weak gesture. "Leave us," she commanded. "Secure General Karan and his conspirators. I will deal with them later." When they were alone again, she turned to Tan, reaching out to take his hand. "We did it," she whispered. We did, he agreed, his voice barely audible. What happens now? The question hung between them, pregnant with possibility. In the days that followed, the empire slowly returned to normal, or what passed for normal in a realm built on the manipulation of time. The Empress announced that a brief temporal disturbance had occurred but had been successfully contained. Few suspected the truth, that the entire universe had been frozen and then restarted. General Karan and his co-conspirators faced imperial justice. Some were sentenced to temporal regression, reduced to infancy to be raised anew with no memory of their treason. Others, including Karan himself, were placed in permanent stasis, their consciousness preserved as a warning to future generations. Throughout these proceedings, Tan remained by the Empress's side, no longer as a janitor but as her officially recognized advisor on temporal matters. His unique experience and connection to the stasis crystal made him invaluable, and his humble perspective provided a counterbalance to the often abstract theories of the Time Lords. Court gossip swirled around this unexpected elevation. Some claimed the janitor had saved the Empress's life during the temporal disturbance. Others whispered of enchantment or manipulation. None guessed the truth, that their souls had been linked across countless lifetimes, destined always to find each other. As the empire stabilized, Aryara and Tan spent increasingly more time together, both publicly and privately. They would often be seen walking in the palace gardens, deep in conversation, or studying ancient texts in the imperial library. Their relationship, impossible to categorize in conventional terms, became the subject of endless speculation. One evening, as they stood on the observatory balcony watching temporal aurora dance across the sky, after effects of their massive manipulation of time, the Empress made an announcement that would change the empire forever. "I am abdicating the throne," she said quietly. Tan turned to her in shock. "Your Majesty, Aryara, you cannot. The empire needs you." "The empire needs renewal," she countered. "I have ruled for millennia. Tan, in all that time, I have never truly lived. I maintained, I preserved, I prevented change rather than embracing it." "But who will rule?" he asked, struggling to comprehend this momentous decision. "I have chosen a successor, a council of 7 Time Lords and ladies. Actually, they will rule together, each serving a term of 100 years before returning to normal life. No more immortal empresses, no more stagnation disguised as stability." Tan was silent for a long moment, absorbing the implications. "And what will you do?" he finally asked. Aryara smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her usually solemn face. "Live," she said simply. "With you, if you're willing. Not as Empress and Janitor, but as 2 souls who have found each other across the vastness of time." "I would like nothing more," Tan replied, his heart full to bursting. "But where would we go? What would we do?" "Anywhere. Everything." Her eyes sparkled with an enthusiasm he had never seen before. "We could explore the outer worlds, study temporal anomalies, help people affected by chronological disturbances, or simply find a quiet place and experience the passage of time like ordinary mortals, for once in our extraordinarily long lives." The transition of power took place over the following year. The Empress announced her decision to the Empire, presented her chosen successors, and began the process of transferring her knowledge and authority. There was resistance. Of course, many had known no ruler but Aryara in their lifetimes or even in their ancestral memory. Change, after so much constancy, was frightening. But she stood firm, insisting that evolution was necessary for the health of the empire. As her final act as Empress, Aryara sealed the stasis crystal in a new chamber, accessible only to the combined will of the 7 council members. "Time is not meant to be controlled by any single individual," she declared at the sealing ceremony. "Not even me." Then, in a gesture that shocked the imperial court, she removed her crown and placed it not on the head of a successor, but on a specially designed pedestal in the council chamber. "Let this serve as a reminder," she announced to the assembled dignitaries. "Power is temporary. Time continues. Change is inevitable." With these words, She took Tan's hand and walked out of the Time Palace, leaving behind the trappings of imperial rule, but taking with her the wisdom gained from millennia of experience. They settled first on a small agricultural world near the edge of the empire, not unlike the one where Tan had grown up. Here, they built a modest home with their own hands, learning the satisfaction of physical labor and the joy of creating something tangible. Aryara, who had never known privacy or simplicity, delighted in ordinary tasks, cooking meals, tending a garden, watching seasons change without interfering in their progression. Tan, who had spent his life serving others, discovered talents and interests he had never had the opportunity to explore. Together, they experienced the natural flow of time, sunrise to sunset, season to season, year to year. They aged, slowly but perceptibly, and found beauty in the process that the Empress had once fought against so fiercely. They did not remain entirely disconnected from imperial affairs. Occasionally, the council would seek their guidance on particularly complex temporal matters. When chronological storms or anomalies threatened nearby systems, they would offer their expertise to help contain the damage. But these interventions became rarer as the years passed and the new council grew into their responsibilities. Aryara and Tan found themselves increasingly content with their quiet life, punctuated by moments of simple joy, the bloom of a rare flower in their garden, the visit of a neighboring child curious about the strange couple who seemed somehow different, the satisfaction of watching the stars move across the night sky in their natural progression. The stasis crystal remained secure in its chamber in the Time Palace, its power carefully regulated by the council. Few knew that a small fragment of the crystal rested in a simple wooden box in the home of the former Empress and her companion, not as a weapon or a tool of power, but as a reminder of the forces that had brought them together. Decades passed. The empire evolved under the guidance of the rotating council, becoming more adaptive, more inclusive, less rigidly hierarchical. Time manipulation remained a cornerstone of imperial technology and culture, but its application grew more democratic, more focused on collective benefit rather than control. Aryara and Tan moved several times, exploring different worlds and cultures throughout the empire. They studied temporal phenomena from a new perspective, wrote treatises that influenced a generation of Time Lords, and occasionally intervened in local affairs when their unique expertise could prevent suffering. Through it all, their connection remained undiminished. If anything, it grew stronger as they accumulated shared experiences in this life to complement the soul bond that stretched across countless previous incarnations. One evening, as they sat on the porch of their latest home, a cottage overlooking a sea of perpetually shifting colors on a world known for its beautiful temporal tides, Aryara reached for Tan's hand. Both were now visibly aged, their hair silver, their faces lined with the evidence of decades lived fully and without manipulation. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "Giving up your immunity to save the universe? Growing old like this when we could have remained unchanged?" Tan smiled, squeezing her hand gently. "Never," he replied with absolute certainty. What would be the point of endless time without truly living in it? Without experiencing its passage? Without you? She leaned against his shoulder, watching as the temporal tides shifted from azure to violet. "We've come so far from Empress and Janitor. And yet," he mused, "perhaps not so far at all. I still maintain our home, keep things in order. You still watch over time, in your own way." They sat in comfortable silence as twilight deepened around them. The first stars appeared in the sky, constant, distant witnesses to the endless cycle of change that defined the universe. "What do you think happens next?" Aryara asked quietly. "When this life ends for us?" "I believe we'll find each other again," Tan replied simply. "We always have before." She nodded, satisfied with this answer. Their souls had recognized each other across the vast expanse of time and circumstance. Death would be merely another temporary separation in an eternal journey shared. The universe continued its endless dance of moments and possibilities around them. Somewhere in the imperial capital, the Council of Time Lords debated policies that would shape the future of countless worlds. The stasis crystal rested securely in its chamber, its power carefully contained and respected. Time flowed as it was meant to flow, neither completely controlled nor entirely chaotic, but a balanced current carrying all of creation forward. And on a porch overlooking a sea of shifting colors, a former Empress and a former Janitor held hands and watched the stars emerge, content in the knowledge that some connections transcend even time itself. For in the end, it was not the grandeur of imperial power or the might of temporal manipulation that had saved the universe, but something far simpler and infinitely more powerful: love, freely given and joyfully received, spanning countless lifetimes and destined to continue for countless more. The stasis crystal fragment in its wooden box glowed softly in their cottage, responding to the harmony of their souls. A small reminder of great power now contained in the ordinary miracle of two lives shared fully, moment by precious moment, in the natural flow of time.